Good afternoon. It is Monday, November 8th, 2010. Well, since my last blog, we've had a lot of things going on. We had an election on Tuesday. Then, of course, we had the major Federal Reserve announcement the following day, which, by the way, was not a coincidence. Okay, these things are timed for a reason. It's not a coincidence that Bernanke happened to decide that he wanted to make this announcement one day after the election. But I talk about the Federal Reserve a lot on this blog. I'm going to talk about the announcement to begin QE2, quantitative easing 2, in my next blog. But for the purposes of today, I just want to go over the election. Now, what should we make of the election? Was it positive? I know a lot of people were celebrating from the results. Other people were not so happy. But the Republicans took the House. They gained a lot of seats in the Senate, including Rand Paul in Kentucky. He won. Great news. The Republicans took a lot of governorships, won several state legislatures. North Carolina, for example, is will be controlled by a Republican legislature for the first time in decades and decades. So overall, I mean, it was positive in that we did see the American electorate become engaged. Real issues were discussed, such as Federal Reserve. The national debt was a key issue. Economic issues were a number one thing. We didn't see foreign policy really touched upon, and I'm a little worried about that. I don't know how susceptible some of these newcomers and Congress will be to demands from the Obama administration for various overseas expenditures. But overall, I mean, I think we got some good people in there, and we'll have to see. We're going to have to hold their feet to the fire. We can't slack off. Like people did after 1994. But notice, I mean, the difference too. I think social issues, cultural issues were a lot more important in those elections. This election season, I didn't really hear those topics brought up too much, and I think that's a good thing. But anyway, how much of an impact is this going to make in our country? Unfortunately, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, I don't know how much of an impact in the big picture. I'm not sure how much of an impact this election is going to have. I'm very skeptical of that. Not just because, the Republican establishment will try to co-opt the Tea Party, which they will try to do. Jim DeMint of South Carolina has talked about that. And he said if the Republican Party from here on out does not hold true to small government, limited government, pro-liberty views, and he's just going to leave. Who knows, maybe go to the Constitution Party. But I mean, so I think this time will be a little different. I think there's a lot more pressure on the Republicans this time around to hold to their views, or hold to limited government views. And this isn't the Karl Roves and Dick Cheneys and such that got elected this time around. It was Rand Paul. It was Sharon Angle unfortunately lost. There's some accusations of election fraud. I won't get into that. But I mean, there are some good people who got in this time around who aren't professional politicians. Johnson from Wisconsin, he's not a politician. He's just a businessman. So I mean, we'll see. But we have to hold their feet to the fire. But the reason why I'm skeptical is because Congress has almost become irrelevant in a lot of ways, and that's sort of like the elephant in the room. I mean, how much does Congress even affect when you have the Federal Reserve? When you have the Federal Reserve dictating monetary policy completely independent from the political process. The vast majority of Americans are completely opposed to QE2, but the Fed doesn't care because they're not responsive to the American people. They don't have to in any way listen to the wishes of the American people. If they want to do something, they can just do it. There's no mechanism for the people to say, no, we don't want the Federal Reserve to create $1 trillion new dollars out of thin air to buy treasury bonds with, because we can't sell them to China anymore. China doesn't want them. So the Congress doesn't even have anything, it can't even control the Fed. Now, that, on the other hand, that might change with the Republicans taking the House and gaining seats in the Senate, because maybe now we can get Ron Paul's audit the Fed bill passed through. And believe me, if this audit the Fed bill gets passed, there's going to be, and we start finding out where all this money is gone, there are going to be more calls to end the Fed. And there is good news about Ron Paul. Ron Paul is now going to be the chairman of the House Monetary Policy Subcommittee. This is really big. So now we have the chair of the House Monetary Policy Subcommittee being a staunch opponent of the Fed. That is huge. And, you know, Paul has had a seat on a committee in the past, and he's grilled Bernanke. But Barney Frank and, you know, Mel White, I mean, these guys won't control it anymore. Ron Paul will be ahead of it. And so he's going to inject this opinion into the debate. I think it's going to be great. Even Sarah Palin today is coming out criticizing the Fed, criticizing Ben Bernanke. I've read her prepared speech. She clearly didn't write it. Someone else wrote it for her. But, you know, it's good to know that at least, you know, she's talking about it because she's very influential. But Rand Paul, I think Rand Paul's going to be great. I think he's going to do well. But the dangers we have to look out for, and this is really important. First, the lame duck session. You know, the Democrats are going to have control of Congress between now and January. Now, they might not try to push anything too big. But in an act of desperation, they could. And so, you know, this would be political suicide, in my view, for the Democrats. But they very well might try to push through certain pieces of their agenda before January. You know, we'll see. That remains to be seen. But also, I think we're starting to see, and I want to read, I don't know if you saw Obama's interview with Daily Show host Jon Stewart, but there was a part of the interview that frightened me a little bit. And I think as the Republicans, now that the Republicans have control of the House, I'm a little bit, you know, I have a feeling that we're going to start to hear more calls for increased executive power. I don't want to say dictatorship, but, you know, read this question that Jon Stewart asked Obama towards the end of the interview. Stewart says, "Do you believe government is nimble enough to handle these 21st century crises?" Everything is a crisis, according to the leftist mind. Everything is a crisis. "Is government agile enough?" These are Jon Stewart's words. "You said, quote, we want to build a 21st century regulatory regime for business, end quote. By the time government builds that, obviously it will be the 22nd century, but won't they have already started trading molecules in some sort of weird... let's see. Does government still have the ability to be agile enough to handle these type of things?" So what Stewart is saying, essentially, is the Constitution too obstructive? Is the Constitution getting in the way of the president getting things done? And if you look at the history of fascist movements, and you know, if you look at the history of those things, like Mussolini, the key was getting things done. We need to get things done, getting action. And Obama says in reply, "I think it's a legitimate question," he says. And then he starts talking about the filibuster and how we need to get rid of the filibuster. Of course, Democrats forget that when Bush was in the White House, they loved the filibuster. And good. I mean, the Senate is supposed to be, was designed as such, so that it would be hard for bills to be rushed through. That's the point. It's a check on the legislative process. But anyway, we have to watch out for that. I have just a bad feeling that the left is going to begin proposing ways to get around these constitutional obstructions. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I'm going to make a video later this week or next week on the Fed and their move. Anyway, have a good time until then, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.